I am Samuel Collins, 35 years old, the first mate of the fishing vessel Northern Star. I have spent more than 10 years of my life drifting across distant seas, facing storms, dangers, and sometimes breathtakingly beautiful moments of nature. But never during all those years have I experienced anything like the story I am about to tell. That day, the sun had just risen, its pale light stretching across an eerily calm sea. The Bering Sea, known for its ferocious waves, was unusually smooth that morning, like a mirror, giving me an uneasy feeling. Standing at the bow of the ship, squinting into the distance, a sense of foreboding welled up inside me. Such an unusual calm often foreshadows a major storm. I stepped into the control room, where Captain Anderson was checking the navigation system. "Captain, I think we should prepare for what's coming. A calm sea like this is not a good sign," I said firmly. Anderson, a man who had spent his entire life at sea, looked up at me and laughed. "Samuel, you always think of the worst. The weather is so nice right now. Why worry unnecessarily?" I didn't want to argue, but my intuition wouldn't let me ignore the feeling. I asked the crew to double-check the anchors and secure the cargo, even though they grumbled that I was being overly anxious. Leaning against the rail, staring out at the sea, the uneasiness never left me. As the sunlight grew brighter, I suddenly noticed a large shape floating on the water's surface. At first, I thought it was just a piece of driftwood, but when it moved, I realized it was an animal. Grabbing a pair of binoculars, I took a closer look. It was a large brown bear, clearly struggling to stay afloat. "Captain, there's something out there," I called out, pointing toward the figure. Anderson stepped outside, raised his binoculars, and took a look. "It's just a bear, Samuel. You're not thinking of bringing it aboard, are you?" I turned to face him. "Captain, it will die if we don't do something. It's looking at us, almost as if it's pleading for help." A few crew members began to gather, murmuring amongst themselves. One of them, Jack Reynolds, shook his head. "That's a wild bear. It doesn't belong on our ship. We're not responsible for it." I felt a tightness in my chest. We can't just stand by and watch. If we don't help, how are we any different from letting a drowning person go unaided? Anderson frowned, staring at me for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "All right, Samuel, but if this endangers the ship or the crew, you'll take full responsibility." I nodded, determination filling me. Not everyone agreed, but I knew I couldn't turn my back on the creature. I looked at the bear, feeling its gaze fixed on us. It wasn't fear in its eyes. It was hope. I quickly directed the crew to prepare the rescue equipment. We had a large net typically used for hauling heavy catches, and I thought it was our best option to save the bear. But none of us had ever tried anything like this before. The others continued murmuring behind me, some skeptical, others clearly unwilling to help. I tried to ignore them and focused on the task at hand. As the ship drew closer, I could see the bear more clearly. It was larger than I had imagined, its soaked fur clinging heavily to its body. Its eyes remained fixed on us, and I felt as though it understood what we were about to do. "Slowly! Don't scare it!" I shouted as Anderson carefully maneuvered the ship closer. For the first attempt, we lowered the net and tried to lift the bear. But as it began to rise out of the water, its sheer weight caused the net to tear. The sound of the rope snapping echoed sharply, sending chills down my spine. The bear slid back into the water, creating a large wave. I gasped, staring at it, fearing it might panic. But no, it stayed in place, its eyes never leaving us. "Samuel, that's enough. We can't pull it up. It's too big," Jack said angrily. I clenched my fists. "No, we'll try again. Fix the net. This time, we'll do it right." Anderson shot me a glance but said nothing, merely signaling the crew to follow my instructions. I jumped down to assist them, securing the ropes tightly and reinforcing the net with stronger cables. "This time, we need to be more careful," I said, trying to keep my composure. On the second attempt, as the net was lowered, I looked at the bear again. It didn't struggle or try to swim away. Instead, it turned itself around, positioning its body as if it was trying to help us. I was astonished, but had no time to dwell on it. "Lift it up, but slowly," I shouted. We pulled carefully, inch by inch. The crew remained silent, the only sound being the creak of the cable straining under the weight. Finally, the bear was lifted out of the water and placed on the deck. Everyone stepped back, their faces a mix of fear and awe, but the bear did nothing. It lay there, panting heavily, water dripping from its soaked fur. I crouched down, keeping a safe distance but close enough to meet its gaze. Those eyes, they weren't wild, fearful, or aggressive. They were tired but filled with gratitude. I could feel it clearly. The bear understood that we had saved it. A wave of relief washed over me. I stood up and looked around at the crew. Some still seemed tense, but no one said anything further. Like me, they seemed caught up in this strange and profound moment. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. Saving this bear was the right decision. The bear lay on the deck, panting, water dripping from its soaked fur. We stood there watching it, everyone on edge. Some of the crew kept their distance, clutching tools that could double as makeshift weapons if anything went wrong. But the bear showed no signs of aggression. It just lay there, its tired eyes scanning its surroundings. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his voice still trembling slightly. I didn't answer immediately, instead crouching down to take a closer look at the bear. I could see its breathing gradually slowing, as if it were trying to recover after its ordeal in the water. "We need to let it rest," I said, turning to Anderson. "Just keep your distance. It doesn't seem dangerous." I began moving closer to the bear, slowly and cautiously. I wasn't entirely sure what I intended to do, only feeling a strong urge to observe it more closely. When I was just a few steps away, the bear lifted its head slightly. Its movement didn't frighten me. Rather, there was something calm, almost deliberate about it. It didn't snarl or growl, just looked at me. "You should be careful, Samuel," Anderson warned from a distance. I nodded, stopping at a safe distance. After a few minutes, as the bear seemed to regain its strength, it began to move. Everyone on board immediately stepped back. But instead of standing up or launching an attack, the bear slowly used its front paw to move across the deck, as though exploring its new surroundings. It stopped in front of a large barrel near the edge of the ship. We all tensed, no one daring to speak. Then something unexpected happened. The bear used its paw to nudge the barrel, attempting to push it into a more balanced position. "Did you just see that?" Jack stammered. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. This behavior was beyond anything I had ever imagined from a wild animal. As we resumed our work inspecting the ship, the bear seemed to observe everything. It didn't do anything alarming, just sat in a corner of the deck, watching our every move. A while later, the engine started making an unusual noise. Jack, being the ship's engineer, immediately went to investigate. As Jack bent down below the deck to investigate, I noticed the bear moving. It walked slowly toward Jack and began pawing lightly at the deck. "Samuel, look at this!" Jack called out. I rushed over and saw the bear repeatedly gesturing at a spot on the deck. Jack examined the area and discovered a loose section of the fuel line. "How on earth did it know that?" Jack whispered, his voice filled with astonishment. I had no answer, but I knew this wasn't a random action. In the hours that followed, the bear continued to display astonishing behavior. It didn't just observe, but seemed to actively participate in everything happening on the ship. When one of the crew members accidentally dropped a shovel near the edge of the deck, the bear quickly moved over, using its paw to secure the shovel before it could slide into the sea. It was a seemingly small act, but it left all of us speechless. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I knew this was no ordinary bear. It seemed to understand us, to grasp what we were doing, and even to make an effort to help. Every time I looked into its eyes, I felt as though I was communicating with a being of consciousness, one whose intelligence surpassed anything I had ever thought possible for a wild animal. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was certain of one thing. This bear was going to change everything. That afternoon, the sky began to turn a murky gray. Heavy clouds rolled in from the horizon, signaling the storm I had been dreading all morning. The wind picked up in bursts, causing the ship to sway slightly. I stood on the deck, staring at the growing waves and feeling the tension saturating the air. "Samuel, the storm's here," Anderson called out loudly, his voice heavy with seriousness. "Sound the alert and get everyone ready." I nodded and quickly ran to notify the crew. Everyone rushed to tighten the cargo straps and secure anything that could slide on the deck. The bear remained seated in its corner, its eyes following every move we made. It didn't appear panicked as I had feared. Instead, It seemed oddly calm, as if it were accustomed to situations like this. The wind grew stronger, and waves began battering the ship more violently. From the control room, Anderson shouted, "Hold tight! This is going to be a big one!" I gripped the railing tightly as a massive wave crashed over the deck, soaking me to the bone with freezing water. Just then, a loud crash echoed across the deck. A heavy cargo crate had come loose, sliding across the deck and slamming into the railing. "Jack, check the cables now!" I shouted. Jack ran toward the crate, but as he bent down, another huge wave slammed into the ship, knocking him off his feet and sending him sliding dangerously close to the edge of the deck. "Jack!" I yelled, sprinting toward him. But before I could reach him, the bear moved. In one swift motion, it used its front paw to grip Jack firmly and pull him away from the edge just as the wave receded. The entire crew froze, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Jack, lying on the deck and gasping for air, looked at the bear with wide eyes, filled with disbelief. "What is happening?" Jack stammered, but no one had an answer. I approached the bear, staring at it for a long moment. It remained calm, its expression unchanged, as if what it had just done was nothing out of the ordinary. The storm grew even fiercer. Anderson struggled to keep the ship on course, while I and the rest of the crew continued battling the loose cargo. Another crate, heavier than the last, slid violently toward the control room. "Stop it!" I yelled, but we weren't fast enough to react. The bear sprang into action again. Using both front paws, it pinned the crate in place, holding it steady until we could run over and secure it. I had no idea where it drew the strength to do such a thing, but once again, it had saved us. As the storm began to subside, I collapsed onto the deck, exhaustion washing over me. The bear approached me, gently placing a paw on the deck as if checking to see if I was all right. Its eyes met mine, filled with a level of care and concern I never thought I'd see in an animal. "Samuel, this isn't just any bear," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "It truly understands what's happening." I didn't reply, just nodded in agreement. Watching the bear sit quietly under the faint sunlight breaking through the storm clouds, I knew it wasn't merely a wild creature. It was an ally, a friend we never expected to find. As night fell, the ship had been inspected and everything was secured. The bear sat silently in a corner of the deck, gazing out into the black expanse of ocean ahead. I stood beside Anderson, both of us quiet for a long moment until he finally spoke. "You were right, Samuel. Bringing it aboard was the best decision we've ever made." I smiled but said nothing. Deep down, I knew our journey with this bear was far from over. The next morning, the sea was calm again, as if the fierce storm from the night before had never happened. Warm sunlight bathed the deck, dispelling the lingering chill from the storm. The bear was still there, sitting quietly in its corner, its eyes observing everyone as they busily checked for damage. It looked healthy, seemingly unaffected by the chaos of the storm. "Samuel, what do we do with it now?" Anderson asked, his voice calmer than usual. I thought for a moment before replying. "We'll find a safe place to release it. But before we do that, I want to make sure it's strong enough to fend for itself." Everyone agreed. We spent the entire morning repairing the ship and preparing for the next leg of our journey. The bear caused no trouble but continued to watch us closely. As we ate breakfast on the deck, I noticed it sitting at a distance, not approaching us. I took a bucket of fresh water and placed it near it. The bear looked at me for a long moment, then slowly approached, careful not to startle anyone. It bent down, drank some water, then paused and looked back toward us, as if waiting to see if anyone else needed water. Jack, sitting nearby, chuckled. "You see that? It's more polite than some of us." I smiled too. It only reinforced my belief that this bear was no ordinary creature. As the sun rose higher, Anderson pointed toward the horizon. "There's the shoreline. We can release it there." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I knew releasing it back into the wild was the right thing to do, but I couldn't deny that I had grown attached to it. I walked over to the bear and sat down a few steps away. "Hey, we're taking you home," I said softly, knowing it couldn't understand. But its eyes met mine, deep and attentive, as if it understood every word. As we approached the shore, the bear stood up, pacing slowly around the deck as if making a final inspection. Then, unexpectedly, it moved to a water bucket and began using its wet paw to draw shapes on the wooden deck. Jack and I exchanged puzzled looks, unsure of what it was doing. But as I looked closer, I realized its drawings were far from random. "That's a map!" Jack exclaimed. I crouched down to examine it. The marks it made formed a shape resembling the coastline ahead, with certain points emphasized where it pressed its paw harder. Comparing it to the ship's map, I realized those marks matched the locations of dangerous reefs near the shore. "This can't be real," Anderson muttered, staring at the deck in disbelief. But the evidence was undeniable. I decided to adjust our course, steering clear of the areas the bear had marked. As we neared the shore, we dropped anchor in a safe spot. Anderson and I opened the deck gate to release the bear. It walked slowly toward the shore, but halfway there, it stopped and turned back to look at us. I stepped forward, and to my surprise, it approached me. The bear raised a paw, as if reaching out to me. I stood still, feeling its rough paw brush lightly against my shoulder. Then it turned back to the deck, picking up a piece of wood that had broken off during the storm. With its sharp claws, it etched a simple drawing onto the wood. Our ship, with 5 small dots representing the crew. The bear gently placed the piece of wood in my hands before stepping onto the sandy shore. We all stood silently, watching as it paused one last time, looking back at us with deep, calm eyes before disappearing into the dense trees. I held the wooden carving in my hand, feeling as though I had just parted ways with an old friend. I didn't know if I would ever see the bear again, but I knew this journey had forever changed us all. 3 weeks later, after we had returned to our familiar fishing waters, everything seemed to have settled back into its routine. But I couldn't stop thinking about the bear. Though unspoken, I knew the rest of the crew felt the same. The moment we parted with it had left a strange void in our hearts, as if we had lost a dear friend. That morning, the sky was clear and the wind was gentle. I was standing on the deck when Jack shouted from the stern, "Samuel, you have to see this." I ran over, following his pointing finger. At first, I only saw the sunlight shimmering on the water's surface, but then I spotted a large figure swimming toward us. "It can't be," I murmured. It was the bear, and it wasn't alone. Behind it, a pod of killer whales swam in a perfect formation. Above them, dozens of seabirds circled, as if guiding the way. The scene was like a painting, so surreal and beautiful that I could hardly believe my eyes. The bear swam straight to the ship, climbing aboard using a rope ladder we had lowered. Its massive paws thudded gently on the deck, as if announcing its presence. I could feel everyone frozen in place, barely daring to breathe. But the bear did nothing threatening. It stood there, calmly looking around at each member of the crew, its gaze familiar and warm, just like the first time we met. But the surprises weren't over yet. The bear turned back toward the deck, picking up something it had carried in its mouth. When it placed it in front of me, I saw it was a collection of seashells, meticulously arranged. Each shell matched the color of the clothes we had been wearing on the day we saved it. Jack broke the silence with a loud laugh. "It remembers every detail. This is unbelievable." The whole crew burst into laughter, not mockery, but laughter filled with wonder and emotion. The bear hadn't just remembered us, it had carefully chosen gifts to give back to us. We spent the entire day with the bear. It didn't just stay on the ship, it led us to one of the richest fishing grounds we had ever seen. The pod of killer whales below worked together, forming a massive circle to drive fish into our nets. For the first time in my life, I witnessed humans and wild animals working in perfect harmony. Before sunset, the bear did something none of us would ever forget. It retrieved a new piece of wood and began carving again. This time, it etched a large circle with our ship and the small dots representing each crew member inside, just like the previous carving. But in the center of the circle, it added a larger figure, itself. It gently placed the carving in my hands, its eyes seeming to say, "We will always be a team." As night fell, the bear departed, but not in silence. The pod of whales swam beside it, their calls blending with the wind and waves. Seabirds circled overhead, forming a ring as if orchestrating a grand farewell. Our entire crew stood on the deck, watching its silhouette fade into the shimmering water. That night, I couldn't sleep. I held the wooden carving in my hands, my heart filled with indescribable emotion. This journey had changed me, not just in how I viewed wildlife, but in how I understood the connection between humans and nature. The next morning, as the sun rose, I looked out over the glistening sea. Deep down, I knew that wherever that bear was, it would always remain a part of us, a part of this journey that could never be replaced.